My name is Alexi, Father Alexi. I'm the Ecumenical and Interreligious Officer for the Roman Catholic Archdiocese here in Los Angeles. I've been in this position for 22 years. It's my pleasure to welcome all of you here to our session this morning. Let me begin by first introducing our panelists, and then I'm going to try to set the theme for what we're going to be discussing. We're honored to have with us the Right Reverend Silvestre Romero, Bishop of the Episcopal Church of Guatemala. Next to him is seated Guillermo Estrugo, Director of Communication, South America Northwest Area of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And then two colleagues of mine from Southern California here. We have Rabbi Laura Owens, representative of the Board of Rabbis of Southern California, and Aziza Hassan, Executive Director of New Ground, a Muslim-Jewish partnership for change. Both of these women are extraordinary here in Southern California. Southern California would be bereft if they were not part of the interfaith scene here. So why are we here for this panel? While governments and educational institutions and employers are certainly adopting policies to promote diversity and inclusion, particularly concerning ethnicity and gender, religious and spiritual diversity is often absent, however, from that effort. And just as the embrace of diversity in terms of ethnicity, gender, and language strengthens our institutions and addresses economic marginalization, acknowledgement and promotion of diversity of faith and spirituality also enriches our communities. Additionally, religious communities and faith-based organizations themselves must encourage diversity in order to confront the explicit and implicit exclusion of certain classes and communities of peoples. So I hope the panel will be able to present and answer questions on these three areas. How does the incorporation of faith into the conversation around diversity and inclusion strengthen efforts to promote unity and equality and equity? How can faith communities take the lead in promoting diversity and inclusion? And how can existing forms of interfaith dialogue and multi-religious collaboration serve as examples of diversity and inclusion efforts? As we've been doing at all of the panels, each of our panelists will have 10 minutes or less to make their initial presentations. And you're free to do it from your place there or here, whichever is more comfortable to you. And then we'll engage in a dialogue amongst the panelists and then entertain any questions you may have. Your Grace, you're on.
Buenos dias, good morning.
Good morning.
It's an honor to sit here with you and to share some thoughts about this particular subject that in one way or another has been part of my faith journey as well, cultural journey in a way. The issue of inclusivity could be seen in a way that is a simple matter of bringing people together that represent different groups. At least in a definition that I was looking into in the dictionary, it says inclusion of diversity of different areas. But the experience that I've had in that particular subject brings me to a deeper, I believe, understanding or way to look at it, which is not just about having people involved or people present, but even though I've heard the word empower being used a lot, it's not a word that I really like, because empower to my way of thinking is giving people power like they don't have it. But to me is the word consciousness, raising of consciousness of who and what we are as individuals, and recognizing, as in our Book of Common Prayer for the baptismal rite, is respecting the dignity of every human being. So the aspect of inclusion is just the beginning process that we need to begin to look at. But it is about recognizing what each and every one that is at the table, and recognizing who might not be there to be invited and have the participation that is needed. My work here in the Episcopal Church for about 20 years in United States prior to being called to be a bishop in Guatemala involved very much that particular process. I began in a congregation in San Jose, California, St. Philip's Episcopal Church, where on Sunday mornings the worship was led in 5 different languages. And to us, it was not just about the language aspect of sharing with one another, but it's recognizing the ways that each group brings richness to our spiritual journey. For example, to have prayers be done in Lakota. I remember one of the experiences that I had in this congregation where in some ceremonies we will have drumming, and people would say, that's not Anglican, or that's not Episcopalian. And I kept kind of scratching my head, what do you mean by it's not? When Article 24 of our Articles of Religion speak about that it is repugnant, it says in our Book of Common Prayer, not to worship in a language that people understand. And to me, that does not mean just what language are we speaking, but what are we communicating? How what we do communicate to one another that it is important, your sense of receiving and giving into the process. And one of the things that I asked the assistant that I had, which was a Lakota priest, to explain to us the richness of what drumming means to the community. Not that I knew, but I knew he could share with us. So he shared it in this particular way, and I'm just kind of paraphrasing and remembering his telling of the story. And he would say to us, you know, we talk about Mother Nature. And if Mother Nature is true to us, it must have a heartbeat. So he invited us to put our hands on our hearts and see if we could feel the beating of our hearts. And if with enough time you could feel it. And he says, you know, if you feel that, there is a rhythm. So the drumming, in a way, it is recognizing the beating of Mother Earth in the sense of our being. And that changed the way that everybody perceived the beating of the drum, not just a noise, but recognition of what it is. And the reason I tell that story, it is because it is in the way that we honor diversity in welcoming and understanding each other that we are able to not just say, let's have diversity. On the opposite side of the stories, I was a Hispanic missioner in the Diocese of Spokane in the state of Washington. And I went to a congregation in which there was no Latino presence, but the population of the town was over 60% Latino, but there was no representation in their community or faith community. And I went to talk to them about how can we welcome the stranger, if I would use that word in a way that help us to talk about diversity in a way. And they said, don't worry about it. Last Sunday we had a mariachi. Okay, that was nice. So we can see and hear in the stories and the realities of what the perspective that we might have about what being diverse could mean. Because it's not just about bringing people in at the table. We have a nice diversity, but if only I would be speaking, for example, then the diversity ceases to be. It is about hearing each other's stories. It is about allowing the stories to be part of who we are in the way that enrich us and help us to be far more connected with God's creation, because God created us all. It is not just, I was the only one created. Look at me, I'm a bishop, of course. But it is about the understanding in that story of creation that many of us hold in common in Genesis that talks about created in God's image. Can we see God's image in each other and honor that presence and that creation of God in each other? And I think that that's one of the things that, at least to me in my experience and the theme that it is upon us in regards to how faith communities begin to embrace that, it is about living it in the best way possible. How do we honor the struggles that maybe some communities might have because of the history that they might have about how they look at each other from the aspects of economic, gender, and so on, is the struggles that all of us need to face together. It is not about condemning only or pointing fingers, but it's to understand and walk with them as we understand what does that mean in the context, and hopefully come to a common understanding in regards to saying we all have been created in God's image. My hope, my prayer, my expectation in my work as bishop is to be able to embrace that diversity and honor that diversity in all the ways that I can, not just within the context of the Episcopal Church. It is an interesting thing, and I'll just mention, not to be politically incorrect or correct depending on where you stand, is the fact that the Summit of the Americas is happening now, and there is a number of presidents not present in that conversation. Talk about diversity, right? And I think that all of us as members of a faith that brings us together for understanding how we honor that creation that God has made beautifully in each other, that we can work together. It is not about what makes us different, but it's about what we have in common. And that, I think that the love of God presence in us and each other should be one that should help us to embrace the diversity of our communities and who and what we do with that diversity. It is not about imposing my belief or my understanding, but it's about being enriched by the exchange that we have with one another. And with that, I leave you, and I'm sure that the rest of the panelists will definitely make wonderful presentations. I'm looking forward to hear from them. Thank you.
Much, Alexi. I am so grateful for the opportunity of sharing in such a diverse table that, of course, we're going to dig deeper and talk about some basic concepts that are very important. And I think that, I can say that as many, I traveled a lot and I forgot many things. I would forget my charger, my tie, and many other things, my razor. I think that I still have some cuts here. And this is an Adventist tie, by the way. And I have my my laptop charged by a Jew charger. And I actually managed to get some other things that are highly diverse. So that is the product of trust. It's lucky, I was lucky not to have forgotten some other things, but I think that we can start focusing on the products of diversity. What a great blessing to be able to take a step with that confidence, trusting so simple things. We can understand things that maybe sometimes we use a lot of philosophy or technicism through law. I am not a philosopher. I'm not a lawyer or an attorney. Sometimes I would love so that I could dig deeper on certain topics, but I believe that in the practice, it's more simple, and that is to really focus on what the previous the previous priest, Catholic priest probably mentioned, or in the previous panel. We need to think about the human being as at the core of everything. And just as Silvestre just mentioned, is that at the end, we are all children of God. And these are absolute truths that we don't even need to remember them, but they're so central, so core that we keep repeating them, right? And I think that I have some genes. Some leaders sometimes tell me in my congregation, from my father's side, my grandfather was born at the Cairo in Egypt. My grandmother was Lebanese. On my mother's side, actually Felipe Nel was my grandfather. So my last names are Strugoneri, and actually in the entire country there is just one family of each last name. It is almost impossible to hide, but I don't want to hide, right? Because I have understood my role in life because of these research that I carried out. And that was very easy because it's just one generation behind. We don't really need to have such a diverse family tree so that we can understand that we all, especially religious, the beloved, we are called to explain, work around that conciliation, and many times the reconciliation as well. So it is really my privilege to be here. And the truth is, and this is not a complaint, Now we know about bullying. Maybe before it didn't exist. It was just a very intense joke, but it is because of these characteristics. And also, since I am part of a, minority, which is the Church of Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints, since I was a kid, I remember some Bible passages with a lot of cruelty. And to make that story morally valid, I have had to work first on me and to really have a reconciliation with everyone that has participated in those stories, because otherwise I wouldn't it wouldn't be valid for me to sit at this table. It has been more of an exercise with myself first than with the others. Second lesson for me is that what is important for me is what we can do with ourselves and also within our faith congregations, so that then with authority, with that power that the Lord is giving us, we can go outside and we can give a hug to the friend. Maybe afterwards we will have a picture, but that would be the last thing. And I love the scripture in Ephesians. We remember Paul's mission, and Paul said when they were getting baptized, and I apologize for those of you who are not Christian, but we can share those same feelings. And he would say, you are no longer foreign, but you are co-citizens of saints and members of God's family. So he ratifies that nature of children of God, as we all are. And then there is another scripture in Colossians, and it says, having re-empowered. And that is because we can recognize first that we are brothers and sisters. But the second thing has a challenge and a condition. Once that we have become the new man that is renewed through the full knowledge, you have to dress as if you were chosen by God, saint and loved with a lot of mercy. So everything that we do doesn't qualify if we don't have this, that mercy, that humbleness, that kindness, and that patience. And then the scripture keeps going so that we can forgive all, so that we can forget what has been done to us. And so just these scriptures, and I don't want to be here giving a preaching, I don't want to be here preaching, and even less to you, that you are experts in scriptures and in many other things much more than I am. But I do believe that it is super important to make a pause, close our eyes, and in deep meditation, really understand what is our real role, so that then we can go deeper and we can talk about these concepts such as inclusion, diversity, equality. The consequence of that last one is the good work in the first concepts. And it is very moving for me to really have all of these spaces that I believe are so crucial for every religious person. And then the second question that Alexa was talking and asking, and the thing is that in Peru and the CIDEMI, which is the Interreligious Council for Refugees, has done so much in Peru, and they have had the capacity to come together with all religions so that they can provide help, especially to Venezuelans, all immigrants, but specifically Venezuelans in Peru, because there are a lot of our brothers. And another specific example we can remember, so initiatives, for example, at Caritas Arequipa with my friend Javier del Rio Alba. And sometime I called him, we were talking about some projects for freedom of religion, and I heard that he was a little, he was not feeling well. He was a little disappointed because they couldn't really make this work for a big school, and they needed help. Afterwards, everything locally ended with an association for building classrooms in a Catholic school from Caritas. That is an amazing work, thanks to the support of our faith organization. How beautiful is it really to be able to see the product on the top of the table in the middle of the conversation, proving that all of these can be done. I would like to end with a message of Russell Emilzon. He was talking about the doctrine of inclusion, and I really need to read this because I don't have the rights. The Lord was sitting down teaching to some of his disciples when one man, just identified as an interpreter of the law, stood up and asked him, so what should I do to get the eternal life? And Jesus knew his heart, right? So he could understand that this was just an attempt for him to say something that he shouldn't say. And then something that was outside of Moses' law. And so he answered with two questions. What is written at the law, in the law? And of course, the expert of the law would be immediately quoting it. And he said, you shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your mind, and your neighbor as you will yourself. You have responded correctly. If you do so, you will live. But then the interpreter of the law was not satisfied, because he knew that among the Jews, there were some rulings and scriptures about associating with people that were not from their religion. And so he insisted that he would require more information from the Lord to get in the middle of a controversy. And who is my neighbor? He asked. Once again, there was an extraordinary opportunity for Jesus Christ. And then he told this beautiful story. He told the story of that man that in Jerusalem was with thieves and was almost killed as a priest was going by, and nobody would help him. And then Jesus taught. But there was a Samaritan that was walking nearby, and he went to him, and he was moved to mercy. And seeing his injuries, he would clean them, and afterwards he would take him to his house and he would take care of him. So Jesus asked the interpreter of the law, who of these three do you think was the neighbor of the one that was in the hands of the thieves? And then the interpreter replied, the one that was merciful with him. Then Jesus gave the last instruction to the interpreter of the law and to all of us as well. In this history, in this story, and he said, go and do the same thing. This morning, and since yesterday, I have that goal of learning from you. But it would never be useful to get all of the theory if I don't do the same thing that this short but deep message is telling us to do. Go and do the same. And that is the invitation that I would like to extend on behalf of my organization. That we do that for ourselves, and also I would like to extend that to all of you. God bless you, my dear friends. Good morning.
Is that it? Yes. Good. It's still morning. Good morning. I'm Rabbi Laura Owens. I'm the co-rabbi at Congregation B'nai Chorin, Children of Freedom. And I'm pleased today to be here to represent the Southern California Board of Rabbis, which is a trans-denominational organization of rabbis from the Orthodox, Conservative, Reform, Reconstructionist, Renewal, and unaffiliated Jewish communities. And while we may not agree on everything, as I'm sure you know, we are all invested in the principle of promoting and ensuring diversity, equity, and inclusion here in Southern California, and in spreading that message around the world. Now, Los Angeles is a city that often finds itself on the cutting edge of cultural and societal movements. And the current environment of interfaith relations here is certainly where we are right now. I'm involved personally with 3 organizations that I think exemplify the commitment of the Jewish community to both deepen and broaden our understanding of the responsibility that we have to infuse our congregants and other constituents with bold innovations in our faith practices, and to bring to our secular positions, the ones that we hold in the world, the values that are at the heart of our traditions. So the first organization that I would like to tell you about is the Sandra Kaplan Community Beit Din. I'm honored to say that I am on both the Board of Trustees and the Board of Governors of this Beit Din, which means a house of judgment. We are the trans-denominational, once again, collection of over 150 rabbis in Southern California who are committed to working in a pluralistic fashion to embrace and include all people who are interested in converting to Judaism, without regard to race, creed, gender, previous religious affiliation, or anything else. We have days of learning every year when we invite experts in their field to come and teach us about the myriad of activities and areas of interest that are important to us, especially regarding outreach and inclusion. Recent learning opportunities have been on transgender issues, Jews of color, welcoming interfaith families, recognition of varying economic conditions, and creating diverse communities of equity and inclusion. The incredibly varied backgrounds of the participating rabbis, synagogues, and the more informal communities allow us to shed light on challenges that might have otherwise escaped our notice if we were simply to follow the old and established patterns that may have been acceptable in the past, but that now, given our greater awareness of the intricacies and nuances of our need to be diverse and inclusive, now provide us with the opportunity to investigate the ways that we are improving, as well as the areas where we need to pursue meaningful growth that is yet to happen. The second organization that I'm involved with is the Santa Monica Area Interfaith Council. And I get to be a member of it even though I am not a resident of Santa Monica, which is real inclusion. I live across the street. And my congregation, which is actually the original synagogue without walls, doesn't have any singular place of residence. Now, Santa Monica is a wildly diverse city, very much like a small version of Los Angeles, with several hundred places of worship, faith-based community centers, and centers of learning and service that provide access to innumerable resources for all members of the community. We, of course, have the standard interfaith celebrations, Martin Luther King Day breakfast, Thanksgiving meals and services, Holocaust Remembrance Day, etc. But we are also very involved in hands-on support of whatever is needed and coming to it from a place of both religious obligation and invitation, and also the larger purpose of using the complementary tenets of our various traditions to inform all of the activities that we are engaged in. We had a tremendous outreach to marginalized people, those who were reluctant to participate in the census a couple of years ago for fear of deportation of themselves or family members. And we did a terrific job of outreach and education so that they could understand that the social services that they require depended on them being counted in the city. We actively support LGBTQ youth and adults. We have worked in concert with the Committee on Racial Justice, and we have monthly meetings as well, during which one of our members offers a teaching from or about their faith, and usually a guest speaker to provide us with new opportunities for immersion in issues local and global. Members of this council include representatives from the widest possible array of religions, traditions, practices, and faiths: Muslim, Jewish, Episcopalian, Methodist, Presbyterian, Lutheran, Catholic, Baptist, Baha'i, Buddhist, Jain, and I'm sure I'm leaving a few people out, but just so that you all understand that everyone is included and respected and embraced by participation in the council. The third organization that I am part of, that Father Alexei is well aware of, is probably the one that is closest to my heart, because I think it represents an enormous step forward in interfaith relations and in how we might utilize our faith traditions to further the conversation that we need to have to all live peacefully together on this planet, welcoming our differences, learning from one another, and engaging in the questions that will affect the future of human life on Earth. I'm talking about the very recent partnership between the Academy for Jewish Religion, California, and Loyola Marymount University. Of course, what we're discussing here is a collaborative initiative between a Jewish seminary and graduate school, ordaining rabbis, cantors, and chaplains, and offering master's degrees in Jewish studies, with a Jesuit Catholic university, one of the most respected in the country. I was ordained as a rabbi at the Academy 14 years ago, and I've served on the board of directors since 2008. I'm currently the chair emerita of the board. The Academy itself is a trans-denominational, pluralistic seminary where students have the opportunity to study with rabbis, cantors, chaplains, and scholars from all streams of Judaism and from other faiths, so that the broadest possible education becomes the norm. The partnership with LMU provides a model for many of our faith traditions and religious institutions to not only share teaching, learning, and best practices, but to forge a path of engagement that will lead us to a more equitable and inclusive society. We hope within the next few years to offer the first doctoral degree in interfaith relations from our joint venture. So we are already diverse. The challenge is to weave that diversity into a fabric where every color, every shade, every texture becomes a significant thread and part of the whole. So the three questions we were asked to ponder are: how does the incorporation of faith into the conversation around diversity and inclusion strengthen efforts to promote equity? And I think the answer, or one of the answers, is that promoting equity is a foundational element in all of our faith traditions and reminds us that there is something greater than our corporeal understanding that can inform the way we understand diversity and inclusion. 2, how can our faith communities take the lead in promoting diversity and inclusion? And I think that we do that by understanding that all of our scriptures or books of knowledge or wisdom traditions all lead us to the core values of compassion and respect for all humanity, of justice, kindness, and fairness to all those with whom we share this precious world, and that our mandate is to offer and to receive the blessings of love, acceptance, and forgiveness, and the creation of a peaceful world where all can thrive. And 3rd, how can existing forms of interfaith dialogue and multi-religious collaboration serve as examples for diversity and inclusion efforts? Well, I think I've presented some examples of what we call in politics working across the aisle. And while we may not be seeing much of that in our houses and senates these days, we should look to the successes of our religious institutions in both bridging and engaging our differences by dialogue and collaboration. And if our focus remains on the values that are at the core of our beliefs, then I think I can be quite optimistic that we can move closer to a world that embodies those beliefs. And as I sit next to my colleague and my friend and my cohort at New Ground, Aziza Hassan, with whom we have shared many, many days of collaboration and dialogue, and particularly the difficult moments. I think we're all here to say this can be done, we can be leaders, and we can also be followers of one another so that we can listen to the wisdom that we each have to impart to what we need to do and what our next steps are.
Thank you, Rabbi, and thank you for the plug about LMU. Aziza.
It is an honor and a pleasure to be here with you. Every single person has brought in, every time you were speaking, I was like, yes, yes, and yes. I think there are essential pieces that when we actually get each other, we can start to actually dig in more to what it is that we need to be doing together. Because, you know, we understand each other, and there's trust, and it allows us to be able to dive in deeper into where we need to go next. And so as I think of Los Angeles, this incredible city, if you walk 2 blocks that way, or 4 that way, you'll be able to eat wherever you want, at like wherever, from different people with different stories and different traditions, and they're incredible. And yet, this incredible city with 214 languages spoken and people from countries from around the world can still silo. 214 languages can speak here and with one another, and we don't have to speak with one another. And it is essential that we're able to speak with one another because this is actually a city of coalitions. And so how do we create space for the coalitions to be able to continue to do the civic duty that we need them to be able to work across, to be able to work even on serving, literally, our communities and the most vulnerable. And so we have to be able to work across difference and be able to figure out how to navigate them better. And I think, too, so Capri Maddox runs a very newly created institution in Los Angeles, recently appointed by the mayor within the last several years, like 3 years. It's part of the Office of Civil Rights, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And she was on a panel last week, and when she was talking, she was like, the vast majority of a lot of the cases that are coming up where people are saying that they have been, there was a bias or something is wrong and there needs to be a place for redress, they start at a place of ignorance. It doesn't start at a place of malicious. It starts at a place of not knowing. And that's a very important thing to know because it allows us to take a step back and to think, okay, how do we get people in front of each other, not just connected in this beautiful city, but actually hearing and listening to specific things so that they can understand specific things around one another. And I think of so many of the places that I have been, beautiful congregations with the most well-intentioned insights, and you ask a question and you get people talking together, one-on-one, maybe in groups of 3, and they're telling specific stories, foundational prompts about like why, moments where they felt like they belonged and how it made them feel, and then also moments where they felt like they didn't belong. And when you dig in deeper there, you start to hit at places around formation of identity, formation of how within our own society that we've created, whether it's the community within a religious institution or outside of it or with even another institution, whatever that is, that we're actually able to get to the heart of that invisible pain that everybody's carrying. And I can't tell you how many places we have been into where people have said, I just feel like I don't belong, or I just feel like I've been silenced, or like I'm alone. Those 3 things come up over and over and over again. And it brings me back to the writings of Howard Thurman, where he talks about, the best of and this is the spirit of what he said, not actually what he said. He said that the best of intentions are still good, yes, intentions. But when they're plugged into a system that is designed to serve others and that system didn't include in its design others, whatever the minority is, it can still do enormous harm. And that's what we need to be paying attention to. And we can get to that place when we're able to create the space for everyone to be able, like you were saying, to articulate, to listen. But it's like that, yes, we have our important hierarchies that help us be efficient, and no one is above listening to and honoring everyone around them. And that how do we create that culture within our own institutions? And so now I want to kind of come to New Ground. So New Ground is an organization that was created so that Muslims and Jews, specifically in Los Angeles, would have a space to be able to, yes, see the important similarities, because there's a lot of them between our different texts and traditions and cultures, multiple cultures within the subsets of the subset of the subset, and to be able to speak to the challenges, but to be able to name the points of disagreement or discomfort or pain without aggrandizing to the point that it allows someone else to shut down their ears and stop listening. So where we get into this place of skill, where it allows people to still hear what other people need to say, and that we're taking it in, and we don't get the excuse of saying, this is too hard, I'm going to walk away. And to say this, like, this isn't just between Muslims and Jews. Let's go back to Los Angeles. Los Angeles is incredible, and we have diversity, and we've taken very seriously, when I say we, like, there's like, I see that polarization is a problem, and so I'm a mother of two, and I have to think about my children's future. And so a few years ago, I joined the Civil and Human Rights Commission because I believe that everyone needs to have redress, so that if there's something wrong, people need to have a place where they can address it. And that's an important thing, so that my children actually feel like they can believe in something bigger than themselves, and they don't just discount the system altogether. And so I joined the commission. But what I say to this is that Los Angeles has taken very seriously acts of hate and hate incidents, and we've been tracking it very seriously. Unfortunately, I'm sad to report that at the beginning of this year, the Los Angeles Times released a study by Cal State LA, which basically says that Los Angeles is now the leader in all US cities of hate crimes. That hits me like a ton of bricks. And Los Angeles is actually tracking. So you also have cities across the United States that aren't tracking, who actually said they had 0. Well, if they have 0, then I question whether or not that's true. But the point there is that Los Angeles has a problem. And so we're taking it seriously, and what does that mean for us? It means that we need to do the really hard work of getting people in front of each other and getting them to listen and to talk to one another. And so what we've been doing with Muslims and Jews, I've also been volunteering with the city, with different commissions, to bring, like, we had African American leadership and Korean American leadership meeting over the 30-year civil unrest. There was huge civil unrest in LA streets 30 years ago, and there's things that people are still holding on to, and things that haven't been addressed yet, and that's the pain point. And so if we convene places, and we're really intentional about how we convene those spaces, we create the opportunity for people to be able to say, this is what's still alive for me. This isn't just something that happened 30 years ago. There's something real and important that needs to be addressed. And we start to think collectively about how we can address it. And we have to be able to and be willing to invest in creating that space. And so, yes, we do it with New Ground, with Muslims and Jews, and it's essential to do it within our own communities, even without whatever the other community is, because when we create space inside of our own institutions, and like you were saying, knowing thyself, right? It's essential that we know thyself, and that we check ourself at the door sometimes, because sometimes ourself is the very problem in and of itself. And I'll move to the Good Samaritan. What I love about that story is, and especially as I dive into it more, is at the time when Jesus was, telling of the story, Samaritans were actually considered the dirtiest of the dirty of the dirty of the dirty. And it was like that, it was the most humble. It was the person who was outcast that became the hero in this story. And we never know where our teachers, where the people who are going to help us carry us through this moment are coming from. And if we just give people the benefit of the doubt, they will teach us something that will stay with us for a very long time and will continue to inspire people in the future. And that's actually where I think the power of the people of faith comes in. We have important stories, and they anchor people. They guide people in values, and they can help us literally ask these kind of questions today and now, where we're hearing each other's stories. I was moderating a discussion, a private discussion among faith leaders yesterday, and one of the leaders, who's African American, looked at me and I asked him a question. I was like, what does it mean for you to feel supported right now? And his response to me was, you know what I really want from people? I want them to respect me, to really respect me, not to just say that I'm a Black leader or I'm a this leader. Don't assume. Ask me my story. Get to know who I am. And I think that when we do that for people, we honor them. And when we honor them, that's the kind of world that we can build together.
Thank you, Aziza. You've all shared some wonderful stories of inclusion and such. Oh, sure.
My Spanish is good, but not as good as his.
Wonderful stories of inclusion in organizations and efforts. And I'm reminded of the Greek Orthodox Cathedral across the street from the cathedral. There's a wonderful mural of an angel. And the words above it say, "We are all angels with one wing. We need the other in order to fly." So I'd like to explore with you just for a few moments. I mean, Aziza, I think you set the tone about creating a safe space for people. I don't know whether any of you have encountered it. I know there's another organization in town here which is ecumenical, meaning only for our fellow Christians, where we haven't been able, I think, to create that safe space because we have difficulty in attracting members of African American, Hispanic denominations, because I believe that they believe we don't listen to their issues. So how do we go about doing that?
It's interesting because one of the things that was going through my mind as I spoke, and then I hear the rest of the speakers, which I'm grateful to hear and to be enriched by it, is to ask the question, who's not here?
That's the question.
Yes, because I think that that's the challenge that we all face. I feel very comfortable speaking in this room because I believe, at least my understanding and my expectation is that we all want to be together. But what about in places where that's not the case? That I myself don't feel safe or others don't feel safe, creating that safe environment. And I'm glad that these type of events are taking place because strengthen what we believe and what we understand, but the question is, what are we going to do when we get out of here? Are we going to continue, not just, I heard about this great organization and leave it there, but it's to find ways that we can replicate and live more of what we have just shared in regards to that aspect of inclusivity, of embracing and welcoming. The issue of immigration that are going on so prevalent in our times, and it's not just here in Latin America or in America as a whole, but it's happening throughout the world, where that challenge is being put forward in every community, where the other comes and we are not ready because whatever issues might be there. And I think that that's the one thing that I believe we all need to start working with. When we talk about any of these issues, it's not about one denomination or the other, it's about all of us. And again, going back to respecting the dignity of every human being. Because I think that the more we embrace and work on that, that at least some of those issues that we're dealing with right now are going to be dealt with in a way that hopefully will come with at least some solution. So I hope that we work in that direction.
Thank you. Anyone else? Please.
Thank you, Alexis.
Thank you. I'm so sorry.
Please, you first.
Okay, forgive me. Okay. So I think it comes down to not just good intentions, it comes down to how we're implementing things, right? And so what we've done at Newground is we've, you can get people in front of each other and you can ask them questions. And if they're not, if you don't have someone who is trusted, who is skilled, and you're investing in that leadership within your own institution, those conversations are either going to take a really long time and people are going to want to walk away, or, people can be like, I'm done, I'm going to walk away. Or maybe there's a yelling match, right? And I'm watching more and more when we bring people together that people need more space from each other. It's happening across whoever is in the room. So when we invest in the leadership of our people, and I'm talking about lay leaders, et cetera, and we give them the skills that they need in order to diffuse conversations and to help be the translators, that's something that will make our institutions and our communities more not only inclusive, but actually hold it together more and make it so that by talking about the harder things, we allow for people to actually feel like their voice matters and they're taken seriously. And they're not just shut out or shut down. And it's kind of like to your earlier point of like people saying, I don't know that my concerns are really taken seriously. And so if we can you imagine this? If each of our institutions that we were at all invested in people being able to have, or at least like a number of the leaders, the lay leadership, being able to convene and hold trusted conversations, because they already have, or hopefully, they have the trust of people, right? And then you convene it within your institution and then with other institutions. How much more we could create the opportunity for people to actually address those things that they care about, that we care about, instead of just saying like we believe in diversity, equity, and inclusion. Okay, it's a word, it's a series of words strung together in a sentence, and we might put it on our website, but how do we actually live it? And how do we make sure that we have a culture at our institution where there's a culture of feedback, where somebody who is my subordinate, or I'm a subordinate of somebody else, and I know that I can actually bring the feedback and I will be honored and taken care of or taken seriously.
Just one moment. That gets back to what you were saying earlier about how we communicate our diversity.
Yep.
Not just having someone at the table, but actually listening to them and hearing them. Please.
Later, when the time came to apply something jointly, and I think that this is the excellent, and this is not excuse the people that are vulnerable, but it is the excellent topic to address us or faith organizations. He called me. He came from a different country to Peru, where is my headquarters, and he said, we are not going to be able to do what we had planned, but I need to see you. He sat down, he looked at me in the eye when he was there in my office. He was with tears in his eyes. He took my hand and he said, some of us are ready, but some of my leaders are still not, for us to do something jointly. And he asked me, and you, what about you? And I told him, well, do you want me to be honest? My leaders are ready, but I don't believe that the entire community is. That moment, I understood that there is a lot still to be done. And the way that we can heal that is with trust, yes, but what is the method to inject that trust? Well, we have to understand that trust also goes hand in hand with doing good, and that should be seen as a culture. And so in order for you to inject a culture, and I believe that we all have that culture of the gospel of love and unity, we have it intrinsically. We are children of the same God, but I believe we still have a lot to develop, just as Ms. Hassan was mentioning. We need to develop that. And the big question is, how do we do that? The answer, I believe, could be even simpler than what we think. And that would be to start sharing with the children, with the youth. What do we do and why are we doing it? And also we can have that influence on leaders internally, so that our Sunday schools or the teachings in the different organizations of faith can have almost as a subject that idea of sharing to do good more strongly in this interreligious sphere. And I would like to finish by saying this. Why did this is self-criticism, why did I have to stop or pause to have this encounter? Yesterday, I was talking to a leader who was exposing here presenting here, and I told him we really need to land and escalate this message to children, to the young people. If I had been that person, probably my answer would have been, why did you wait so long? Luckily, he didn't say that to me. But the thing is, these people that are making the decisions are not always in these encounters. And I'm not trying to say that you are not important. I'm talking about myself. My leaders go from country to country, and they're so generous that sometimes they use their efforts and their resources for us to be able to be here. I don't have the answer, but we need to find a way for them to feel the same thing that we are feeling. I don't doubt that they can understand it in essence, but the bigger mission is that, culturally speaking, our organizations need to have that conviction to participate in dialogue and to be able to do good with the neighbor that they have next to them. And I don't know what this guy next to me, Silvestre, has. I don't know what is it about him, but he's so loving. When I sat down, he put his hand on me, and I could feel that deep love. So these experiences can really show that there is a great brotherhood or sisterhood, and we really need to start putting this into practice.
Well said. Well said. Thank you. Rabbi, did you like to?
So I think one of the words that keeps coming up when we're talking about how we move forward and what next steps are is trust. And trust only comes in relationship. And relationship only happens over the dialogue between people. So one doesn't meet a stranger and instantly trust them, although you did have that experience. So that may be the exception that proves the rule. I think that the trust that comes, and I certainly know from the encounters that I've had with Aziza and with New Ground and with the Southern California Muslim Jewish Forum that we used to be a part of, have built slowly. And I think that one of the things that we need to do is sort of not lower our expectations of the result, but reduce the speed at which we think it's going to happen. This is incremental. We are making enormous changes to try to get back to the essence of human behavior as we understand it before it has been occluded by what happens around us that feels evil and exclusive and unkind and uncompassionate. Those things have informed the way we meet and greet someone who immediately is not one of us. And so I think that the building of trust is, first of all, the removal of fear of the other, because fear is often what gets in the way of our being able to hear. It's either I'm afraid that I'm going to hear something that I can't hear about myself because I don't want to believe it's true, or it's the fear of being having someone be angry with us, or the fear that, in fact, I haven't met up with my own best self yet. And so I think that the trust comes when we allow ourselves the safe space to hear the story of another without any judgment, then to take that in and be able to hold it for a moment before we then share our story, rather than that feeling of I just can't wait until I can say what I have to say. Really being able to sit for a moment with either the familiarity or the discomfort of what's coming our way, being able to ingest it, whether or not we can embrace it, and hold on to the moment where we say, okay, I think that I've heard what you said. Respond in a way that may let the other person know that they have been heard, and then go on to tell our own story. And ultimately, all of our wisdom traditions are about stories. We have the stories of people and how they relate to each other, not It's all about the narrative. And so I think when we allow ourselves the space to both listen to the narrative, to the story, and then tell our own, we begin to develop trust. But it only happens in relationship.
Thank you, Rabbi. I think the challenge is living in that moment of uncomfortability
Exactly, yes.
and allowing that moment to really impact you before you move on or try to move on.
So that's the liminal space that we aim to find when we are in relationship with one another, where something doesn't need to be said. It's that the moment, I like to say, between the reaction and the response.
Yeah.
So that we take that 5-second breath of discomfort, of I don't even know what I want to say, and let the breath, the spirit, the ruach, the moment come in where the unfamiliarity can move into a peaceful acceptance of the fact that I don't know exactly where I am, but I'm going to stay here and try to find it.
The important thing is staying there. Right?
Staying there, yeah.
Bishop?
Yeah. We have all afternoon, right? Because this
Not
is
quite, Your Grace, not quite.
because this is wonderful conversation, and I go with you because I'm being enriched and educated in this process, because one of the things that begins to happen when we embrace your description about take the moment, not just rush, because it seems to me that, and that's one of the things that I probably want to say this before I say anything else, the pandemic, as difficult, hard, and painful that it has been, it also has given us time in the midst of everything that we have to do. I was by myself for 8 months. My wife had to stay here in the U.S. while I was in Guatemala. She couldn't travel back, and I can tell you that it was a moment of, not because I was peaceful, because without her, that's I hope that you don't get that kind of message.
We're not taking it that way.
Yeah, please. But it was about what it means to be by ourselves and listening to one another, even though we're not together. It was a really challenging moment, but also an enriching moment in some way. And I think that helped us, at least to me, it helped me to understand how rich I also become when I have the other, because now I don't.
Yeah, yeah. You're bereft.
Yes, and the need that we had, that, and I can tell you that I'm sure that if I mention the word Zoom, everybody knows what I'm talking about, even though if you've never heard about it before. And it was the need of the other that called us to find ways of how we can embrace, and hopefully in the midst of all that, in the times that we had, because we had a bit more time, it seems like, in a way, I don't know how true that is, but let's say that it's true. It was, and I really like your point about, I don't need to be always busy and running, because I need to embrace the time and also the reality of what it means to welcome and understand the need that I have of the other.
Yes.
I think it was a powerful moment, and I hope that we don't lose it, that we feed by that reality, by ways of how we embrace one another as we continue to have these moments. It's refreshing at this time to be here and not be covered with love.
I would like to go back to something that you said just at the beginning, that I think it is probably a more salient question than the 3 beautiful questions that we were asked to ponder. And that is, who is not here? Amen. That just struck me as what we all need to think about. Who is not here and why? Yes. What is keeping the people that we need to have these conversations with away from us? What am I doing that is not allowing another person to be able to be present with me? What is standing in the way? Who is not here and why? I think because we look in this room and everyone is engaged in their own thought process, but also in listening and thinking about how it affects them in their life and whatever we're all doing. But what are the empty chairs? Who might be sitting there, and how might we invite them to sit at these tables and engage in this conversation? What a profound question. Who is not here and why, and how do we get them here? So, thank you.
That's the follow-up question for all of us. How do we get them here? How do we do that?
Well, I like to think of myself as a cheerleader.
You are, for all of Southern California.
Many years ago, in some PTA group, we were all invited to think of the one word that described us. And for me, it's cheerleader. Yeah, I did that in high school. I had the pom-poms. But I think that essentially what I feel my best role is encouraging the other person to stand up and be the best that they can be. You know, that feeling of when your team scores the run and everybody stands up and goes, yay. Well, why can't we all be there even before the run is scored, even before the touchdown is complete, even before the three-pointer is made? What is it that will engage us? How can we cheer one another on? And I don't know that I have the answer. I just know that I feel like that's where we all need to be.
Aziza, and then Your Grace.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more. People need to be invested in and feel like they can, and feel like they are honored when that happens. And we can still do it by give feedback in a way that still honors. The other piece is, I tell a story. So New Ground brings together 10 Muslims, 10 Jews, over the course of 10 months. They're all people who leaders have identified as leaders in their community, who they want to be able to really be able to have difficult conversations across difference. And you know, when you were reading all the list of like the different Jewish entities just alone, I was like, yes, right? Like, and it's hard because like you are speaking across all those differences and all those differences in the Muslim community, and we're trying to get diversity within the Muslim community and the Jewish community. Well, 2 years ago, with the awful that unfolded and the murder of George Floyd and the reality and the reckoning that we all went through, and realizing that there's so much more that we need to be doing, even if we started off with best of intentions. And we'd already been convening people with, you know, across different backgrounds within our different traditions. And we realized that we're going to shift the program in a way that really brought in stories that actually helped address some of the racism within our structures that we help perpetuate. And so we decided, okay, this group of leaders that we're going to bring in, we need to make sure that there's very specific folks that we brought in. When we tried to recruit, more specifically, different folks of color, they were like, no, like, we don't want to be in this space. We don't have bandwidth. We don't have time. We don't have, so the question of value kept coming up, and how are we honoring their time? And they're like, you need to be doing your own stuff. And like, how do we do that? And so we started wrestling with this question. And so we were like, okay, we understand that. Will you at least sit on an advisory council to help us so that we are listening in a way that you are feeling like we're actually honoring? And so they agreed, and we had them presenting in different ways, but it was limited time. And then slowly, as people were feeling actually listened to and what they were saying was reflected in different ways, they started to invest more and more time, because it actually felt like they were fully actually incorporated, and it wasn't just lip service. And so how we intentionally like, it doesn't have to be the same system that we've had all this time. We can shift our structure so that we can be the cheerleader who listens, who helps everyone be themselves, not necessarily fit in the peg the way we want them to.
Well, that's, of course, the challenge, to make everyone feel a part of it, not just present, but heard. Your Grace.
Last October, Bishop Julio Muray, who is our presiding bishop for our province, came to Guatemala and he spoke to our clergy about the environment. And out of that, a commission for the actions and the responsibilities that we have within our diocese began to emerge. And last Saturday, on the eve of Pentecost in our liturgical calendar, our ecumenical gathering happened. And the subject came about the impact of the environment. And out of that, a young lady, woman said, I'm a part of a group that is looking after the environment. And I have to say, and I don't mean to take credit, but I want to answer the question in this way. I acknowledge at the time that we have this commission in my mind, and I said, why couldn't she be part of our group? And immediately, I can tell you, and I don't mean to boast, but is to understand that sometimes what we need to do is just take steps, concrete steps. I said, would you like to be part of our commission? It wasn't that she was Anglican or Episcopalian. She's just someone that can offer to do that. Sometimes it's just about making this or taking the steps to make it happen. It's not about, well, what are they going to say? How's that? No, let's just do it. Sometimes it's about taking the bold steps. And in that same matter, because I always trust the Spirit is present in all what we do, I would love to have Guillermo come to Guatemala and to work with him and to say what we can do. I feel that strongly, and I hope that we can make it happen. Thank you, Guillermo.
We have a room full of witnesses now, a room full of witnesses.
In Yiddish, we call that a shidduch.
Yes.
You made a good match.
I think we'd like to offer an opportunity for the audience to be involved here. Any questions or comments you'd like to make? Nothing? They wowed you all? Oh, they're just hungry, probably, yes. Yeah.
Lunchtime.
Yeah, we're standing between you and lunch.
Well,
Please, Rabbi.
I'd like to ask Aziza to expound a little bit on the phrase, because I think a lot of us working in communities heard a lot of this in the spring and summer of 2020 after the murder of George Floyd. You do your own stuff. We have a different thing. That's valid. I understand that. There were people from the Black community who did not want to be sitting at the table with white folks who were trying to do better, and I understand that. So how and when and how do we bridge that kind of gap, honoring the fact that, yeah, you deal with your own stuff, we don't want to be there for you or with you, and at the same time, how do we deal, or how does one deal with our own stuff, whatever that is, without being inclusive? I think these are big issues when we're talking about inclusion and diversity.
Thank you for that. There's so much that comes up and that has come up, so just to focus on a few. When we overtax a small group of, or a group of folks, whatever, an individual or two, like, they burn out. Stories are powerful, and it's important that we get people to tell their stories. But when I'm telling my story, it takes an enormous amount of effort to make sure that I'm saying it in a way that you'll hear it, to respond when I see people's body language shift in the room and I'm questioning, did I say something? And so when people go into spaces, when I go into spaces where I don't necessarily know everybody, it can take me a good amount of time to recover afterwards. And even though like we might be doing this over and over again as people speaking from a podium, like it comes with a cost. And so when we're asking people to do that, like we can shift a little bit. So like one of the things that we did or recently was like, okay, people are feeling trauma in exponential ways, and it is actually bringing up other past traumas, and literally people feel incapacitated. And like when you're so overwhelmed in that place, it's hard to find your words, like you are so overwhelmed. And so when people are finally in a place where they feel like they can tell their story, we've gotten to a place where like, okay, we really want people to hear this story. Are you willing to record it for us? And then we will play it inside of a safe space, and we won't share it with anybody. It will never be online. It will only be in our vault, and it's only for this particular purpose. And anytime we play the story, we always ask the person permission ahead of time, and we say, we would like to play it at this place. Are you still okay with us sharing your story? And they always know the intention, and that it's not going to be quoted, used, manipulated in any way, because that's the other part. It's like when I tell my story, I become very vulnerable, and there's an additional expense. And so when people have asked, like, I just want to know the ins and outs of the Israel-Palestine conflict. People are saying I'm just, right? But like, come on, like there's a serious tax that exists for people when you are sharing even your personal story. And so that's one. And then the second is once we finally get people into a place and we're talking about the conversation, like things came up where people were saying, like Jews of color specifically, and this happened even with Muslims of color in these different religious institutions, and they said, yeah, security is really important. And when you have all the security force in and around the house of worship and the synagogue, my family and I can barely get in the building. And when we can get in the building, we feel so degraded and
Less than.
yeah, and we don't feel like we belong here. Like, you're keeping everybody safe, but we actually feel less safe because I actually don't even know if my family's going to be considered suspicious if something does happen. So, like, there is no space for me. And being able to actually have that conversation where it's not an attack on the leadership, it's an insight. And being able to actually bring it to and have closed door spaces to be able to air some of those things out, and then be able to talk about them in a more public place later. But always permission, always going slower than you want to. Everyone always wants to speed up. And there's just something holy when we slow enough down so that we can actually start to see what we're blind to.
Good points. Another opportunity, anyone out there wish to comment or ask a question? Would you like to then close us out? Anything you'd like to add?
Well, I just simply would like to thank once again. I think this is a good moment to say some names and last names. Elias, of course, that has been working so hard in the conciliation between the organizations in our country and also in Latin America as well. Aurora Vargas, who is also in charge of the Interreligious Council of Peru. Of course, the slangs that have also made a permanent work. Of course, my Edgardo, my friend, now where the tie is coming from. And yes, Dr. Durman, of course, Gary Doxey, Rob, my friend, and the organization that is always working so much towards these efforts of freedom of religion and fraternization. So I believe that probably the smartest thing that I could do is say their names, because I learn a lot from them and from all of you. So it has really been my pleasure to share with my colleagues here. Just saying colleagues makes me feel important. So thank you very much.
You are important. Everyone is important, and we must include everyone, right? Amen. We look forward to seeing you in Guatemala.
Yeah, amen to that.
Thank you all. And let's have a round of applause for our panel.